Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the double-edged sword of lower borrowing figures than expected for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. Sounds mad, because why would any government not be pleased with lower borrowing figures? When you're a Tory leader, trying to con both the public and your own MPs is possibly one reason. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've discussed recently how a number of Conservative MPs don't just want tax cuts because that's what Conservatives are all about, but because they really believe it's how they're going to retain their seats in the next election. After all, Conservatives tend to go about, yeah, we can run the country, and you have more money in your pocket, we have lower taxes. Well, right now, highest tax burden since the post-war rebuilding years. Not really the sort of thing a lot of these Conservatives want to go into the election defending. And current polling is putting the Conservatives on for losing, maybe 2/3 of all their seats. Now, whether this actually happens is another matter, but it is certainly true that some seats which have been safe for the Conservatives for a while are now very marginal. In fact, we've got Conservative MPs now who've never really had to fight for their seat, and all of a sudden are going to have to, and they don't know how. And some of them are just going, well, we need to cut taxes. Oh, if we cut taxes, I'll win my seat back. That's fine. And a large majority of Tory MPs are worried about their future election prospects, and they see delivering tax cuts in next year's budget as key to their continued ride on the gravy train. Now, more than that, I suspect many would like them to be announced sooner rather than later, because as soon as they're announced, they can go knocking on the door saying, we're getting the tax cuts. After all, it's easier to retain support than it is to regain it once it's lost. So the last thing they need is to wait until, say, next March, after they've already lost a lot of that support. And all of this means that there is a constant hum within the Conservative Parliamentary Party of calls for tax cuts. Whenever results are announced which suggest that the government hasn't spent as much as planned, or in this case borrowed, those calls grow louder. This week we had the news that the cost of borrowing was lower than anticipated. Borrowing is still up, of course. They're still borrowing more. That is very much part of their budget. But it's not as high as originally budgeted for. So now Conservative MPs are calling for tax cuts, with the likes of John Redwood and Jacob Rees-Mogg seemingly leading the way. Now, if the government were to post much better tax revenues than budgeted for, then you can have a case for tax cuts. Now, I would still say that the money would be put better use improving public services, and polling suggests that the public agree. But these are Tories we're talking about, and Tories gonna Tory. If they cut taxes roughly in line with a, say, surplus of tax revenues, yeah, you could justify that. But if they announce tax cuts based on, oh, well, we're borrowing more than last year, but not as much as we thought we might, then those are unfunded tax cuts, in exactly the same way as Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng attempted last year. So why are Conservative MPs calling for it? Yes, I know, some think that the tax cuts are their key to winning their seats in the next election, but surely not at the cost of another catastrophic loss of market confidence. Because after last year's mini-budget, the Tories' polling collapsed to the point where, after the next election, the DUP may well have been the largest Conservative party in Westminster. Have these MPs forgotten that? Or do they think that the markets will somehow react differently to the same circumstances? Or perhaps do they just not understand the first thing about what caused that fateful mini-budget to knacker the economy last year, because they understand very little about anything? And this is a real concern, because Sunak and Hunt, they can't ignore their own MPs. I don't know how many of them are insane enough to make an issue of this, but we do know that Sunak folds like a deck chair when his MPs are griping, even when they're forcing him to do what will cost the party credibility with voters, which is utterly self-defeating. If Hunt is backed into a corner here, there's a huge risk that it'll be an ill wind that blows nobody any good. If it triggers another market crash, it'll finish off the Tories' chances for a generation. It'll also intensify the cost of living crisis for millions at a time when neither the country nor they can really cope with it. And it will leave Labour with an economy shattered into way more pieces than even they are planning for right now. Interestingly, going back to Tory MPs being detached from reality. So Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the loudest voices arguing for these tax cuts, has said, because the borrowing figures were lower than expected, this is why we shouldn't listen to the OBR, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility. We shouldn't be listening to them. Well, yeah, See, the last time Rees-Mogg was in government, it was a government which did precisely what he's calling for now. They announced budget measures without involving the OBR at all. The Tories went from 32 points in the polls to 19, and Labour went from 40 to 51. If it weren't for the millions who would suffer from pension losses and higher mortgages and rent costs, I would say go for it. But if I were a Conservative MP, I would be pointing out to my colleagues, we tried doing what these ghouls said last September. It did not go well. What they're arguing for is the same thing. In fact, politically speaking, what happened last year went so badly that the party has never actually recovered. They have never been as high as 32 points in the polls, and even that was too far behind. And as for economically speaking, we are going to be paying for those few weeks of madness for many years to come. So it seems that the difference between Sunak and Hunt trying to replicate what Truss and Kwarteng did, with magically different results of course, is the numbers. If there are lots of MPs insisting on these tax cuts, it will sort of happen because Sunak's weak. If it's just a few gobshites who manage to amplify their voices in the Tory media, but who won't actually rebel, or if they did, there's too few of them to matter, we may get away with it. That is the difference. That is the only thing which may stop another market crash in the next year, is the hope that maybe there aren't too many lunatics in the Conservative Parliamentary Party. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.